Released on February 14, 2012 in North America, Twisted Metal 2012, or Twisted Metal PS3, gave the franchise a new spark with its new features and focus on online gameplay. This game feels more similar to Twisted Metal Black due to many things such as the open environments, story cutscenes, and the overall feel of combat. Without further ado, let's give Twisted Metal 2012 a deeper look. The combat in Twisted Metal 2012 feels good for the most part. It does have some rough edges. It's still the iconic destroy everything in sight gameplay, but a couple of things were added to amp up the action and accommodate for such large maps. First thing players will notice is there's a lock-on system for most of the weapons in the game. Whenever the reticle lands on an opponent and turns red, the next used weapon will most likely hit, so players don't have to rely as much on freeze missiles as they once did. This reticle is very useful and necessary considering the maps in this game are much more open and larger than previous entries, so there's a lot of space for vehicles to evade attacks. Not to mention, it's not like the weapons will hit every time. The player can easily drift too much and miss their target, or get rammed by an opponent, so they'll have to learn the system and understand when it's primed to hit a target. Speaking of useful features, the D-pad now acts as a way for players to use special moves. Left drops a mine, up shoots a freeze missile, and right puts up a shield. Just like previous games, there's a cooldown meter, so that these attacks can't be spammed. Curiously enough though, it seems the less armor a vehicle has, the faster the regeneration rate of this meter is. This was done in order to balance the game out. Smaller health bars should be able to use the shield more than big rigs. Anyways, players can also use an alternative version of each of these attacks. For example, if a player were to press up and triangle, they'll shoot a freeze missile behind them instead of in front of them. Well, on the topic of alternative versions of attacks, there are two special moves for every vehicle that can be toggled by selecting the special move, pressing triangle, and pressing the fire button. The second special attack is usually more powerful than the standard special, but isn't as accurate or practical. Other additional general gameplay features include the ability to change the vehicle's sidearm. Players can swap out the mounted guns on their vehicle to a sidearm such as a submachine gun or a shotgun. Players are going to have to get close and personal with these other guns, but the short range is made up for with the more damage they do to others. Also, once players kill an opponent, they can run over the people that were in the vehicle for health and extra weapons. Very helpful considering how much health vehicles have in this game. 2012 also expands the weapon pool with the Stalker missile, which players can charge up for more damage, a shotgun blast that is much more effective up close, and a sniper rifle that can pack a punch, but needs a good amount of accuracy and focus to work. These new general additions are fairly clever. They add a lot of customization and variety to the game. Players can have all kinds of battles and use all kinds of strategies because of them. The vehicles in this game are already full of variety and primed for keeping the gameplay fresh, so add in these new options and there's so much possibilities. Not to mention, things like the D-pad controls are nice, considering trying to execute the special moves in previous games wasn't so reliable. Now, let's move on to the story mode. The actual story part is very similar to Twisted Metal Black's cutscenes, in which a character has an intro video where some exposition is given about their past and what their wish is, a middle video that describes the reason why they want their wish, and an ending where Calypso grants their wish. I'll talk about these cutscenes later. For now, let's discuss the gameplay of story mode. For the most part, all the levels are the standard destroy every vehicle to win, but there are a couple twists thrown in to freshen things up. The story has game modes such as Juggernaut, an armored semi-truck keeps spawning in enemies and the player must destroy it and the rest of the opponents to win. Cage match, contestants must stay inside a small random section of the map or else their grace meter runs out. Once it runs out, the player will start to take damage, so get inside fast or suffer the consequences. And Twisted Race. Players will first have to race against their opponents in order to win. Follow the path, and don't miss too much of the gates, or it's game over. The first and third Twisted Race, all the player has to do is win in first place, but the player must defeat the 3 other winners in the second Twisted Race. Apart from the new game modes, there's of course regular deathmatch mode, and endurance, along with boss battles. Each boss battle is unique. players will have to find out how to defeat their opponent in order to progress with the story and win the competition. Sweet Tooth must torch the Grimm's brothers' huge monster trucks. Grimm needs to take down Dollface's flying robot, and Dollface has to go through Sweet Tooth's gauntlet of a maze. They're pretty fun, they fit with the character's personality, and as I mentioned time and time again, more variety is always a good thing. The unlockables in this game are attained by beating the story levels, and by beating the game on different difficulties. The game ranks the player's performance on levels, and they can earn a bronze, silver, or gold medal. Warthog is unlocked if the player gets gold on all the levels. Other than that, the medals really don't do anything. While still in unlockables, the player can change the character that drives their chosen vehicle whenever they beat that character's ladder, with the exception of Sweet Tooth. You see, every character in this game has a cult, if you will, where the main character uses their minions in order to win the competition. Sweet Tooth has the clowns, Grimm has the skulls, Dollface has the dolls, and Preacher has the holy men. These cults can be chosen in the challenge and online modes. Anyways, the story mode in this game is quite fun. The multiple game modes make the latter less monotonous and refreshing, but they don't stray too far from the core gameplay of Twisted Metal. Before we get into the online mode, let's discuss challenge mode and training. Challenge mode is the same as the previous games, but of course this time, players are given a lot more customization options in terms of the vehicle they drive and the rules of the gameplay. Shocker, I know. There's two types of endurance modes, the difference between them being whether or not the player faces one enemy or multiple enemies at a time. Anyways, the training section teaches the players basic and advanced maneuvers, along with how to play certain game modes. The game mode section shows screenshots of how to play them, while everything else just displays tips and tricks. Pretty bare bones if you ask me. Now, online mode, or at least what I can gather about it. Yeah, the servers went down in 2019, so I can only regurgitate what other people said about this game to give you an idea of what it was like. Online play allowed up to 16 players, and included the single player modes, along with new exclusive game modes for online mayhem. These modes included Team Deathmatch, players choose a team and must have more kills than the opposing team to win, Hunted, a player is chosen to be hunted and must survive as long as they can while the others try and kill the hunted. When someone kills the hunted, they gain a point but become the hunted, and the hunted can get points by killing others. Last Man Standing, the same game mode from Black. Players choose a set amount of vehicles and must kill the others before they run out of lives. And last but not least, Nuke. During gameplay, each team has a statue that goes around the map, and the opposing team has to torch it. The player has to trash the enemy team's leader, strap them to a missile, then fire it at the statue to win. Both Hunted and Last Man Standing have team versions, so it's not every person for themselves. Luckily, these game modes can be played via local multiplayer, so it's not like they're completely unplayable now, but getting 15 other people to set up LAN connections in the same area is not very practical. Well, anyways, these game modes are quite entertaining and creative. Just wish I was able to get that 16 player experience. Like Twisted Metal Black, 2012 takes on a darker art style that's supposed to be reflective of the cruel nature of the contest, but it does have some color to make sure important pieces stick out and make the game pop a little. After all, 2012 isn't as mature as Black, so the visuals didn't have to be as depressing either. It works quite well, the colors add some life to the game, but the game still understands how to use its shadows to keep it somber. Now, let's move on to the levels. The levels are reminiscent of Twisted Metal Black's battlegrounds, with wide open areas and plenty of places to discover. But unlike Black, there's a lot more moving parts, and players can see a lot of the map in front of them. This is thanks to the PS3's power. The PS2 could only show so much without frame rate issues, so Black used fog, and areas in the distance wouldn't fully show themselves until the player got closer. This makes it easier to see weapons, enemies, and structures. The levels also seem to have more layers and complexity than previous games. Many buildings can be entered and destroyed, and the overall size of the map seems to be larger. 2012 only has 8 maps, but because they're so complex and fun, it's very acceptable to take in this quality over quantity approach. Anyways, how about we analyze these levels one more time. Sun Springs, California. a typical suburbs neighborhood filled with roads, stores, and other locations such as churches and movie theaters. The buildings are destroyable, but also act as shelter, so be careful about which ones to destroy. Black Rock Stadium, an arena made specifically for the Twisted Metal contest. Beyond the move, platforms constantly move and there's a lot of things that can cause damage. There's a big battlefield at the bottom of the level where a lot of the combat will happen, but be sure to use the pathways up above for health and weapons. Metro Square. Take a trip to Times Square and take in the sights of the city. Plenty of department stores, take a ride on the subway, have fun at the ice rink, and hey, is that the Statue of Liberty? This map takes place during the holiday season, so once again, the players can ruin Christmas with their destruction, but just be careful with those slippery roads. Watkins Harbor, a drab town destroyed by pollution, surrounded by oil rigs and warehouses the player can enter. Go out into the open to find enemies, or stay indoors for shelter and to expand your arsenal. Diablo Pass, a desolate desert where players can navigate the landscape or follow the road to a small town. The rocky environment has a lot of verticality to it, and is quite fast and fun to explore. Diesel City, a big old city with the main infrastructure in the middle with a highway that wraps around the whole map. There's so many places to go and so many things to explore. It's easy to get lost in the scrapyard, warehouses, or driving from one end of the map to another. Thrills and Spills Park. There couldn't have been a better place to duke it out than an amusement park. There's plenty of rides and attractions, and they all have unique layouts and weapons / self to give. Destroy that Ferris wheel if you feel so entitled to. Los Angeles Skyline. Once again, contestants find themselves high in the sky on top of some of the finest skyscrapers. Jump between all the different structures, destroy everything in sight, but be careful with those turns. The levels are quite the upgrade from previous games. Their explorability and interactivity are practically unmatched. There's so many moving parts, room, and paths to explore. It livens up the gameplay. Speaking of that, players can choose which section of the map they want to play on in challenge mode. So, technically speaking, there's over 30 levels in this game. The cutscenes in this game are live action, with the backgrounds usually being chroma key green screens. Really the only things that were actually there while filming were the actors and props. Most everything else is CGI. It's odd and a bit distracting, but I suppose it's alright. I don't really have much against it. Production choices aside, the tone of these characters are quite pessimistic and grim. The characters brood over the past and how they wish they could change what they've done. Sweet Tooth wants to kill the last member of his family, Grim wants to stop his dad from performing the stunt that led to his death, and Dollface initially wants to remove her mask, but then asks Calypso to make her a fashion star with the mask instead. In each ending, every character gets screwed over in typical Calypso fashion. Besides those three, a preacher can be seen between cutscenes citing Twisted Metal as a grave evil and his frontrunner being the devil himself. And a post-credit scene shows Sweet Tooth spared his son because he knew he would follow in his footsteps if he were to die. The last cutscene also shows the hell Calypso puts the victims of Twisted Metal through, which makes sense considering he gains power through the deaths caused by the contest. The main character's cutscenes are decent, but not as great as Black's storylines. The middle cutscenes feel quite shallow, and I don't believe they really add much to the character's depth the same way Black did. Grim doesn't even get a middle cutscene. It would have been nice to know why he never got over the death of his father. Sure, I get that the catastrophe happened to him at such a young age, but it would have been nice if the game decided to peek inside Grim's mind and how this event affected other parts of his life. Dollface's cutscenes are the best out of the bunch, but even then, a large portion of her story is borrowed from Twisted Metal Black, so how much of it can I really praise when it's not that original? Overall, they're okay, but I expected more, especially considering the standard Black set for future Twisted Metal games. Head-On got a pass, because it followed in the footsteps of the first two games, and having 3 cutscenes for most of the characters wouldn't have happened with the PSP's disc size. Alright, one more thing, the UI and menus. The in-game HUD is clever, useful, and easy to read. The player's weapon stash is shown at the bottom, and the name of the weapon will appear above the icon. In the bottom left, players can see the special moves and their cooldown meter. A mini-map sits in the top left, where players can see the other contestants, incoming attacks, and health icons. Simple, but very effective. Being able to see every weapon at once instead of just one at a time, or three at a time, can be quite useful in battle if the player can think of a specific weapon they should use in the heat of the moment. Well, onto the menus. They're gritty and fit with the dark aesthetic of this game. In the background of the main menu, players can see Sweet Tooth, Grim, Dollface, or Preacher driving along a desolate highway as the player makes their choices. Other than that, the menus are pretty simple, nothing to really write home about. This game utilizes a soundtrack of original tracks and licensed songs. First, the original tracks. Each sleep play decided to go back to the energetic, adrenaline-pumping tunes of the first two Twisted Metals instead of the more atmospheric tracks from Black and Head On. It's very appropriate and man, they pack quite the punch. A lot of the songs are metal to fit in with the gritty aesthetic, but there are some songs that are more rock and roll to bring back some of the nostalgia of the single track games. Unfortunately, the licensed songs really don't fit with the vibe of this game. I understand their conclusion. Most of them are 70s and 80s rock and roll, which is kind of what inspired the music of Twisted Metal 1 and 2, but considering those games weren't as dark as 2012, they kind of missed the mark. I think the style of music from Twisted Metal 4's curated soundtrack would have worked a lot better in this game. That punky, almost new metal stuff had that adrenaline and edge that fits the mayhem of the contest. Luckily, players can replace the soundtrack with their own songs if they transfer music onto their PS3. A quite neat concept, but its execution wasn't the best. The volume levels of the music fluctuates a lot, and adjusting the sound options doesn't do much. Custom music will stop playing when a cutscene starts, but oddly enough, it doesn't quiet down during Calypso's narrations. It also would have been nice to skip songs when a playlist is playing. Other than that, it is cool players could create their own playlist and kill their opponents to whatever bangs their head. Okay, now the voice acting. The voice actors for the main cast do their job quite well. Their voices fit with their characters, and they understood what kind of tone and inflection would work best with them. Sweet Tooth's obsession can be heard in his voice, Grim sounds rather gloomy and somber, and Dollface brags about her accomplishments and pumps herself up. Last but not least, the sound effects. They're also pretty good. They have a lot of impact and are appropriate to whatever it is they represent. Very much the standard for the Twisted Metal games. Twisted Metal has a few extras, with one of them taking players away from the game. I'm referring to twistedmetal.com, which contain features like being able to see player stats and customizing their vehicles. I would show this website via the Wayback Machine, but I always get stuck on the choose your location page, so apologies about the lack of appropriate footage. 2012 also has its fair share of Easter eggs. Players can see items from previous games and other games David Jaffe worked on in Calypso's office. The grocery store in Sun Springs mentions the names of the characters.
Bruners is proud to announce our newest arrival, Agent Stone Ice Cream. 25 flavors, including world-famous Area 51 Rocky Road.
And the arcade in the same level has War of the Monsters, a game also developed by Eat, Sleep, Play. Last but not least, players can change the paint job on the many vehicles. They could choose the color, pattern, and design. A neat little feature to keep on adding to that sweet, sweet customization. Well, onto the issues. The number one issue I have with this game is the lack of single player content. From what I understand, this game was supposed to be available only through download via the PlayStation Store, and multiplayer only, but changed late into development to include single player stuff. I get why the game doesn't have that much for those that don't want to play online, but does it seem odd to anybody else that they planned for this game to be online only? I mean, sure, from what I've seen about the multiplayer game modes, it does seem quite fun, but is Twisted Metal known for things like its endings, boss battles, and going through a level ladder? I understand why 16-player mayhem sounds fun, but I don't know why they wanted to steer far from the things that made Twisted Metal what it is. Some of you watching probably have fond memories of having friends over and duking it out in multiplayer modes, and I get why they wanted to capitalize on that. but some of you also probably have memories of playing every character and beating every level just to see the endings too. Secondly, the controls. They're alright, but I really have a problem with the fact that the handle brake doesn't slow down the car. Circle acts as the brakes, and X is the handle brake, so trying to press both is awkward enough, but it's even worse considering the player doesn't want to move their fingers away from the shoulder buttons, because then that would take away from their ability to attack. Not to mention, in order to reverse in this game, players have to pull the R3 stick down, which is completely deviant from not only every other Twisted Metal game, but pretty much every other single player game where a car is drivable. Seriously, why couldn't it just be one of the face buttons, or pulling down on the L3 stick, which controls the vehicle, and pressing square? Such an odd control scheme. Third, Death Race. Racing should not be included in a vehicular combat game. It deviates too much from the combat aspect of things. Considering this game's controls aren't the best, it just doesn't work well. The first two Death Races aren't that bad, but holy hell is the third one absolutely terrible. The only thing I dislike about this game mode is players have to use a vehicle with good handling and speed to win. And limiting choice to players is never a good thing, especially when one of this game's main additions is its customizations. Besides those three, I don't have any other major issues with this game. Before I end this section, let's discuss the legacy of Twisted Metal. Legacy is the thing I do whenever a game series goes on hiatus or hasn't had a new game for a while. Twisted Metal was a huge staple for the PlayStation 1 and 2. People loved the first game when it came out, and Twisted Metal Black was one of the best titles for the PS2. The chaotic gameplay, awesome soundtracks, memorable endings, and the standout characters really made Twisted Metal a series worth picking up. Sweet Tooth may not be as popular as he once was, but it can easily be argued he's still one of gaming's most popular icons. Regardless of his popularity, Sweet Tooth is definitely one of the coolest gaming characters of all time. His design is just killer. I wasn't born when this series was at its peak, but I still had a lot of fun with it when I discovered it, and Twisted Metal has a special place in my heart, and no doubt a lot of you watching feel the same way. This series also changed my taste in music too. I have music tracks from Twisted 1, 2, and Small Brawl on my phone, and thanks to Twisted Metal 3 and 4, I was able to discover Rob Zombie and 1 Minute Silence, two bands I still listen to this day. So anyways, what's the future look like for the series? Well, as of this video, a TV series based on the franchise is in post-production, and PlayStation's head of products did tease the release later in 2023. There's a rumored Twisted Metal game supposedly coming out because Sony was looking for developers for a vehicular combat game, but this is just a rumor. It sounds like a Twisted Metal entry, but it could be something completely new. I will review the TV series whenever it comes out, and same for the rumored game, if it is indeed a new Twisted Metal. But that's about it for the series. I do truly hope it comes back one day, and this time with Mr. Slam on the roster. Twisted Metal 2012 is lacking in terms of content with its small amount of single player stuff, and made worse with the fact online play is no longer an option. Regardless, the general gameplay is pretty fun, the story mode freshens up the ladder module, its dark art style works well with the series, and the original tracks are pretty good. Not to mention, the game has a large amount of customization, which works very well with the many types of vehicles players can use. Let's count up everything Twisted Metal 2012 has. 17 playable vehicles that widely vary in their types of builds, 8 unique battlegrounds with the option to change their layouts, easy to use special moves, convenient for combat, a gritty dark art style that pops with color, but is still appropriate to the vibes of Twisted Metal, tons and tons of options for players to choose from in regards to the way they want to duke it out in combat, a good original soundtrack, but a licensed soundtrack that really doesn't fit that well with this game, the ability to use custom songs from the PS3's hard drive, an online mode with plenty of game modes that was probably a lot of fun, and plenty of other fun things the series is known for. 2012 may be a little underwhelming with its short story mode, but at least I had fun online play, the gameplay is quite varied, the soundtrack is appropriate and kick-ass, and the cutscenes aren't bad for what they're worth. Well, until next time, guess we'll just have to wait till the TV show.